Good evening, dear friends. Well then, I'm glad to greet you on the screens of your devices with YouTube. Once again, my friend and I are here in another series of our favorite YouTube almanac. Well then, how are you? Are you taking a break in the summer? Are you getting a tan? How are things? So, what do? Who's working? Who's just resting? But despite the scorching heat, despite the blazing sun, we still need to keep being cheerful, healthy, and beautiful. And today, friends, we will finally learn not only to be healthy, cheerful, beautiful, but also smart. Because our brain also needs to work well, right? And if you are beautiful but stupid, that's also not very good. You should combine both beauty and wisdom within yourself so that people admire not only your external appearance, but also the inner content of your intellectual abilities. So, friends, for this purpose, specially prepared for you, for intellectual enthusiasts, for those who want to develop their brain, their thinking to an academic level, to the level of a practical Nobel laureate, there are certain techniques to increase the blood supply to the brain. And today we will dissect them together. And if you are interested in this topic, write about it in the comments. There are also ways to increase the microcirculation of the brain using medicine. There are different groups of drugs. There are drugs that improve blood flow to the brain. There are those that stimulate the function of the brain in different ways as well. They speed up, for example, the conduction of a nerve impulse, but they have a side effect. They somewhat exhaust the nervous system. And there are also such drugs that act on the place of connection of neurons. It's called a synapse, where the extensions of neurons connect, axons and dendrites. At this place, a chemical reaction occurs, for which acetylcholine is needed. And there are drugs that accelerate the synthesis of acetylcholine, because if it is insufficient, the impulse seems to go. But there is no connection between the neurons. That's why our mind, the work of the brain, our thinking, reaction, attention, are also connected with the work of these synapses. Also, if you are interested in this topic, comment as well. The next issue can be dedicated to various groups of drugs, and drugs that affect the conduction of the nerve impulse, preserving or restoring the myelin sheath. This is the sheath of nerves through which the movement of the nerve impulse occurs, the transfer of information from one neuron to another. But today we need to start with a mechanical problem because all these drugs will not work. Here is the confirmation of that. All these drugs only work in the absence of mechanical compression of the vessels. As we know, we have two main blood supply systems of our brain, of our entire organ complex, which is located on the neck. This is the common carotid artery and the vertebral artery. There are obstacles on the way of these two arteries, and these obstacles prevent our brain from being fully supplied with blood. There are two main problems. This is a disruption of blood flow and a disruption of outflow. First, a person, even at an early age, a large part of people have a disruption of venous outflow from the brain, from the neck, the whole head. This will manifest itself both in headaches and in a decrease in attention, concentration, possibly dizziness. But dizziness may occur in the case when, for example, you sat down, then got up fast, and you may experience your vision going darker. This is a violation of venous outflow. Symptoms. There may also be a feeling of heaviness in the head. For example, after you got up in the morning, when you were sleeping, you turned your head in an uncomfortable position. These are also signs of venous outflow disturbance. And the second reason is already a violation of blood flow. There is blood flow through the arteries, blood outflow through the veins, but there is also a lymphatic system. There is also cerebrospinal fluid, which circulates and as if bathes our spinal cord, our brain. Preserving it, one of its functions is to protect our brain. This, for example, in case when you sharply turn your head. Your brain doesn't knock inside your skull and you don't knock yourself out from this movement. This is thanks to the cerebrospinal fluid, your spinal brain fluid. Here you can say thank you to your cerebrospinal fluid. That's why you didn't knock yourself out just by turning your head. Thank you, cerebrospinal fluid. Whoever is grateful to cerebrospinal fluid, write a plus in the comments. So, friends, but it also has a nutritional function. What are we going to do today? We will eliminate the reasons why the blood is poorly supplied to our brain and the reasons why, if there is enough time, the blood has problems leaving our brain. Also, another reason for the violation of venous lymphatic flow, the very first one even, the one that immediately catches the eye, are swellings on the face, swellings under the eyes, especially in the morning. Then during the day, they decrease. Asymmetrical swellings often occur, slightly more on one side where the outflow is worse, and less on the other side. Well then, friends, we have talked with you. Time to move on to actions, right? You probably wanted me to say that. Well then, let's go. In general, just watch. As we already said, the common carotid and vertebral arteries are the two main arteries. The common carotid artery divides into the external and internal carotid. Each of them supplies blood to certain parts of the brain and our organs, including the senses, tongue, nose, and eyes. Eyes can be considered a part of the brain in the sense that they are an extension of it. The optic nerve practically ends in our eyeball. And the eyeball is an extension of our brain. And different centers are located in our brain. The centers of vision, hearing, smell, taste, they are all located there. Movement, too. Therefore, probably the most important thing in our body is the brain. Your consciousness, most likely, is there. Not in the liver, not in the kidneys, probably still in the brain, right? Memory, attention, as if on a 36 kilobyte flash drive, everything is recorded there and all the information is stored there. Some people reach several, possibly gigabytes, terabytes. Someone who thinks a lot, someone who has a good memory. So friends, what now? Now you need to know that there are major obstacles. There are such places in the path of the arteries where it can be pinched. There are several places along the path of the spinal artery. There are several places. 2 of them are practically present in everyone. Everyone has a risk that the artery may be pinched there, and it's purely a matter of luck who gets lucky and who doesn't. It will already depend on the anatomical structure. In general, the first and most common is the transition place. The cervico-occipital transition is the place where the first vertebra meets the occipital bone, where the vertebral artery makes a bend. And this is where a group of muscles is located. Here are the short neck flexors, which often become overstrained and spasm. Why is that? Because the larger muscles, this long neck extensor, this trapezius muscle, they practically have such a one-sided load in our life. The thing is that we look up less often. We do this movement much less than the downward movement. Because of this, the muscles change their structure. They become less elastic and their blood supply decreases. Because unlike, for example, the muscles of the arms or legs, where the muscles still fill with blood when you get up from a chair. When you go to the kitchen, there is a flow of blood to the muscle. But in this muscle, there is practically no such blood flow, because it is always under static load for you. Because of this static load, there is an overstrain in it. There is the formation of spasms between the fascia. Then the change in the structure of the muscle, fibrosis occurs in the muscles themselves right inside. And because of this, the muscle cannot fully fill with blood. It loses elasticity, becomes more rigid, and the vessels that pass between the muscles begin to pinch. Here, friends, as you can see, the vertebral artery passes inside its own channel. This channel is formed by the vertebrae's transverse processes, and this place between the first vertebra in the occipital bone. And in this place, our vertebral artery is very easily compressed. It begins to squeeze, and therefore, when we turn, it can be squeezed even more. It's also very important that here, in this place, where the artery passes inside the transverse processes, there was no such thing that, for example, one vertebra makes such a movement. It most often happens during the movement. It makes an excessive movement, and in this place of the spine, it can also be compressed when this excessive movement occurs. When there is a limitation of mobility, often of one vertebra, and when we want to turn our head, the lower lying vertebrae start to move, right here, because we need to turn our head somehow. Earlier, when we turned our head, all our vertebrae moved a little bit, and this light was preserved for the artery. And if, for example, one of our vertebrae has completely stopped moving, turning the head begins to hurt. It starts to move excessively. Other vertebrae start to overstrain. Now our vertebral artery is in motion, and thus it develops instability. It develops against the background that the joint has to move more than its amplitude. More amplitude than it is meant to move for. That is one reason of the instability developed. Then the joints get used to it, and such local looseness appears between some vertebrae. This is already the second level, so to speak. As you might have guessed, that is, the first is between the first vertebra and the occipital bone, and the second is exactly the place where the artery is compressed. This is inside the spinal canal itself. Well, the third one is not always there. It's an anatomical feature. It's up to the entrance to the canal. This is the vertebral artery's bony canal, which I just showed. It starts to be compressed between the scalene muscles. The artery is shortened before entering between the anterior and middle scalene muscles. They are shortened there. And there is also possible compression at this place. That was our vertebral artery. Now, what about the carotid? There's not much space where it can be compressed. Most often, there is a syndrome called the sternocleidomastoid muscle syndrome. This muscle is located between the visible sternum and the protrusion. There is such a protrusion here. Here, on the temporal bone, and between this muscle and under the hyoid bone, there is such a thin muscle. And right in this place, during the spasm of this muscle, during the shortening of this muscle, the carotid artery is also compressed. But this does not happen so often. It happens less often than the development of atherosclerosis, with which, when the lumen of the internal carotid artery narrows. So, friends, what should we do about this now? How can we prevent this whole process and restore good blood supply to our brain? So, friends, the most important thing in exercises for the neck muscles is what needs to be done to improve blood supply, increase flow, improve blood drainage from the head, the brain. We need to act on the muscles in such a way as to compensate for the load that we did not receive during the day. That is, the muscles should constantly work, but during the day they do not do this, especially the neck muscles. Therefore, through exercise, we should compensate for this. First, we need to act on the muscles, give them such a load that they did not receive. And second, we should act on the vertebrae and joints. And third, on their vessels, arteries, and veins. So, friends, let's get started. The first thing we'll do is work on the muscles. The first exercise, it's both a diagnostic. It will show you how your muscles are working. If you can't do it, it means they are very weak. That is, it is simultaneously diagnostic, preventive, and restorative. Look, we lie on our back in this way, engaging the cervical spinal muscles, muscles that you practically do not use in life. Therefore, the carotid artery, the common carotid artery, the external, the internal carotid artery, they stop being fully protected by this muscle, fully closed, because our carotid arteries are located right under this muscle. And for starters, the first thing you need to do is learn to hold your head like this in a static position. This is the first exercise. Here, if after 10 seconds your head starts to shake, it's a sign that the muscle is clearly very weak. By the way, we even got a video about whether the neck muscle affects pressure. Can exercises for the neck reduce pressure? It turns out the effect on this muscle and on the neck flexor, here is another such small muscle, it is the opposite muscle of the flexor. These muscles indeed reduce pressure. We conducted an experiment directly. Those who are interested in this topic can look up this video. So the first thing is static retention. This is the initial exercise. Here you need to learn to hold your head for 20-30 seconds in such a position. Because the main thing that this muscle should be capable of is to hold the weight of your head. If it can't do this, it's very bad. So this is the only thing this muscle is needed for. During the day, we hardly use it. Maybe when we turn our heads, it works a little bit. Due to walking on two legs, this muscle has lost its function. In animals, when they stand on all fours like this, they turn their heads. It participates to a greater extent. Because there is a different angle between the position of the head and the neck in humans, so we turn our heads practically without its participation. And this muscle over time becomes thinner, thinner, and thinner. And because of this, the flow to the muscle is disrupted, and at the same time the flow to the head, the outflow of lymph and blood from the head, is disrupted. This is the first exercise. First, learn to simply use this muscle statically, to strain it. 3 to 4 approaches until you feel fatigue. Well, if you can't do it at all, learn to hold it for at least 5 seconds. Whoever can do it, 3 approaches, 20 to 30 seconds each. This is exercise number 1. Exercise 2. Now for the opposing muscles, those on the other side. They are rarely as weak here as our first muscle. They are usually stronger here, so we can immediately give them a dynamic load. Here you also slightly lower your head in this way and start looking forward and then down. Forward, and then just a glance down at the floor. Don't tilt your head too much over here. So you made a forward motion, then down. Forward, down. Just do it slowly, not quickly, if you've never done this before. That is, this is not an exercise you should get too tired from. It's more about increasing the blood flow to the neck flexors, to the muscles that usually also work statically for us. When we sit looking at the phone or reading a newspaper or a book, if there are still people who read books, so this is the first group of exercises. Here we do 2 to 3 approaches 10 times each, and next we load the lateral muscle group. But here at the same time, the pectoral clavicle scapular muscle will be working, and part of the extensor, and the trapezius muscles. Here you just lie on your side like this and start lifting your head up here. You do the same set 3-4 times on each side of 10 repetitions each. to one side. Then turn and give a load on the muscles from the other side. Maybe you will notice that the load feels different from one side. Maybe it's a little easier to do this exercise from the other side. Such a thing is possible when you're doing it for the first time, because it happens so that muscles often develop asymmetrically on the neck from one side. It happens that muscles are generally twice as small as from the other side. Usually it can happen that from one side, it's twice as small as it should be, and from the other, it's twice as small as from the first side. Well, friends, this was our first group of exercises to increase blood flow to the muscles and to strengthen muscle tone. Now we need to remove the excessive tension from those muscles that are overloaded, while these main ones are not working. The neck flexor and the sternocleidomastoid are not working yet. And for those who find it easy to do this exercise lying on their stomach, there is another option of the neck flexor exercise. This is an option you do with your own hands. You put your hands on the back of your head like this. Don't press hard and do this kind of bending. Look down and forward, and up under 45 degrees. In this way, you can also load the neck muscles. Here you can also load alternately on the right and left side. For this, here's the first exercise. You just put your hands on the back of your head. If you don't push, for a start, this will be enough. Just the weight of your hands. Here you do it until you feel a slight fatigue. And the second option is you put your hand like this a little above the ear, but do not push not in the direction backwards and forward, but in this direction. That is, if this is a right hand, then push to the left side. There, you pushed a little. And at the same time with this, you start to make the movement forward, back, forward, back. Here you will also simultaneously work the sternocleidomastoid muscle in the same way. On one side, you make this movement, then on the other side. Due to this sternocleidomastoid muscle as if starts to engage again in your daily movements, a connection appears between the muscle and the brain again. Because if the muscle does not work for a long time, the muscle ceases to exist for the brain. And when you load it again, the impulse goes again from the muscle to the brain, from the brain to the muscle, and it begins to recover. So, friends, well, we've already shared quite a lot with you. That's probably enough for today. But if you have an interest in this topic, write a comment. Maybe we can make a separate broadcast about medications, or we will continue the exercise with you. Ah, yes, let's do the stretching to relieve the load for the muscles that are overloaded. That's why the head is tilted forward due to the shortening of the scalene muscles. 3 scalene muscles, anterior, middle, and posterior. The sternocleidomastoid muscles are located along the back edge. There is a dense part. This is one of the scalene muscles. At the same time, you turn your head at about a 45-degree angle so that your nose is looking at your elbow. You press on this muscle and start moving your head. Well, such a movement is quite complicated, and at the same time, you make a movement down along the back edge of the sternocleidomastoid muscle. Here you simultaneously remove the spikes between the sternocleidomastoid and scalene muscles, and at the same time also stretch the fascia of the scalene muscles. After this exercise, you will notice that it will be more comfortable for you to hold your head not in the position when it is tilted forward, but it will straighten up by itself. It will turn out to be where it has never been before. Well, friends, you're probably tired already, aren't you? Those who did it with me and those who watched are also tired. Well, for today, I think that's enough. You need to try all this. So let's train for a week, Write your results in the comments. We'll look at everything, read it, and make conclusions. Should we continue to delve deeper into this topic, or is it not worth it? Well, engage in sports, help your parents. Until new broadcasts, friends.